All right, class. So we are going to talk about the human heart today. We will talk about the general anatomy of the heart. Then we will focus on the blood flow through the heart. We will also talk about the electrical conductivity of the heart. We will also learn about cardiac output and the cardiac cycle. Okay. So to start with, okay, so heart. On the right hand side, we do see a picture of the human heart. Now, understand that the human heart lies at the center of the cardiovascular system. And because of the pumping action of the heart, blood flows through the blood vessels, right? Therefore, if the heart stops to pump, the blood will not flow throughout the body. And what will happen if blood stops flowing? Well, blood carries a bunch of essential things. For example, blood transports oxygen and carbon dioxide. Blood transports nutrients. Blood picks up all the wastes from different organs of the body and dumps it into the excretory organs. So in absence of blood flow, our cells cannot get rid of the toxic materials, and eventually we will die in case the heart fails. The heart pumps about 75 beats per minute, and about 5 liter of blood is pumped out of each ventricle in 1 minute. The amount of blood that is pumped out of each ventricle in 1 minute is called cardiac output. I want you to remember the definition of cardiac output. All right. So as the heart pumps, that generates blood pressure, right? So how do we define blood pressure? Blood pressure is defined as the force of blood against the blood vessel walls. And know that this follows Boyle's law. We are not going into too much details about the Boyle's law. Something we will talk more when we look into the respiratory system. And I also want you to understand that a minimum blood pressure is really essential for the blood to circulate. If there is no pressure, obviously blood will stop flowing. Okay. So, on the right hand side, you do see a picture of a human body with the heart at the center of the cardiovascular system. And if you imagine the heart beating action of the heart will propel the blood to the different arteries. And the arteries will carry the blood to different parts of the body, and the deoxygenated blood will return back to the heart via the veins. Now, how do we define arteries and veins? Well, arteries are defined as vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Arteries away, remember A. Veins are the vessels that carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood back to the heart. That's the simplest definition. And if you look at the arteries and veins near the heart, see that they have a larger diameter. For example, look here, the aorta. And these blood vessels, do you see these? These have a larger diameter. And since these have a larger diameter, they are called great vessels. So the arteries and veins that are closer to the heart are called great vessels. Okay, moving on to the general anatomy of the heart. Again, in a regular class, I draw things out on the whiteboard, and I'm trying to kind of replicate the same here. So this is my version of the heart, not the prettiest, but it works for students. So I have drawn a 4-chambered heart. There are 2 upper chambers and 2 lower chambers, right? So this chamber right here is the right atrium. This chamber is the left atrium. This chamber is the right ventricle. And this chamber is the left ventricle. Now, I want you to know one thing. The term atrium is singular. The term atria is plural. So when I'm saying atria, I'm referring to both the upper chambers of the heart. If I'm referring to an atrium, I'm actually talking about just one chamber, one upper chamber. Okay, and you also see that the right side of the heart, I have purposely drawn it smaller as compared to the left side. Do you see that? The left side is bigger as compared to the right. This is for a reason. Know that the right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs. Okay, right side is pumping blood to the lungs. Now, if you really think, how far are the lungs from the heart? Not too far away, right? Therefore, the right side, therefore, the right side doesn't have to try too hard, or the right side doesn't have to push blood through a long distance to transport it to the lungs. Therefore, the muscles in the right hand side are thinner. However, the left side of the heart is associated with pumping blood to all the different parts of the body, and therefore the left side has to pump harder. And that is why the muscles are more developed in the left hand side, and I have represented that by showing a expanded left side of the heart. So that's why the left side is bigger. Okay. Now in between, okay, now looking at the atrium first, few things we need to talk about. There are muscles of the atrium, and these are the general muscles of the atria, and these are called pectinate muscles. What are they? Pectinate. They are pectinate muscles. Okay. Now in between the right atrium and the left atrium, there is this green partition, right? I'm now marking this with red. And the partition between these two chambers is called a septum. And in this case, this is called interatrial septum. Along the interatrial septum, there is a small depression, and this depression is called fossa ovalis. Fossa ovalis. More to be discussed in blood vessels in our next chapter. So the depression that lies in the interatrial septum is called fossa ovalis. Again, more to be discussed in next chapter. All right. Now looking at the ventricles now. There is a right ventricle and a left ventricle, right? Now ventricles have some general muscles, and the general ventricular muscles are called trabeculae carnae. Trabeculae carnae are the general muscles of the ventricles. All right. Same as the atria, if we look in between the two ventricles, there is a partition, and this partition is called interventricular septum. This is interventricular septum. All right. Okay. And at the inferior side of the ventricles, let me see if I can change color. Oh yeah, I can. At the inferior side, there are these finger-like muscles, and these finger-like muscles are called papillary muscles. What are they called? Papillary muscles. Very good. Papillary muscles. So let's review. Human heart, 4-chambered. We have upper 2 chambers called atria. We have a right atrium and a left atrium. The lower 2 chambers are called ventricles. We have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. The left side of the heart is associated with pumping blood to different parts of the body, and that is why the muscles are stronger in the left hand side, which is denoted by an enlarged or a bigger left side of the heart. On the other hand, the right side of the heart is associated with pumping blood to the lungs. Therefore, the muscles are not super strong on the right hand side, and that is shown by a smaller right atrium and right ventricle. All right. Now looking into the atria, the general muscles of the atria are called pectinate muscles. In between the right and the left atrium, we have a partition called interatrial septum. Looking into the ventricles, the general muscles of the ventricles are called trabeculae carneae, and the partition between the right and the left ventricle is called interventricular septum. At the inferior side of each ventricle, we have some finger-like muscles, and these muscles are called papillary muscles. Another thing, on the interatrial septum, there is a small depressed region called fossa ovalis. More to be discussed in next chapter. All right. Now, how are the right atrium and the right ventricle connected? Well, if you see the orange lines, they represent valves. So in between the right atrium and the right ventricle, this is called tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. This is also known as right AV valve, or some people call it right atrioventricular valve because it is between the atrium and the ventricle. Atrioventricular valve. Okay. On the other side, on the left hand side, the valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle is called bicuspid valve. This is bicuspid valve, also known as mitral valve. People also call it left AV valve. So I'll just put left AV valve or left atrioventricular valve. So they have different names. Now, Rupa, how do we remember which is tri and which is bi? Remember one thing, we always try before we buy, right? Well, we have not bought non-essential things in a while, but we try before you buy. You try before you buy. So remember that. All right. Now the tricuspid valves and the bicuspid valves, they are connected to the papillary muscles. Again, I repeat, the bicuspid and the tricuspid valves are connected to the papillary muscles by these cord-like or string-like structures, and these cords or strings are called chordae tendineae. These are called chordae tendineae. These are string-like structures that help the bi and the tricuspid valves to be connected to the papillary muscles, and this is really important. These cords maintain proper tension on the valves and prevent the valves from prolapsing. Okay? All right, so that's a function of the chordae tendineae. All right, so I will start with a new video, and I will review the anatomy before we move on to blood flow through the heart.